Folks who weren't able to join us are going to be able to watch this recording back afterwards. We post all of our recordings on YouTube. And I think, I am sharing my screen. So welcome to today's workshop. This workshop is academic, technical, and professional writing, part of our Skills for Grad Students series. And the slides, the link to the slides is there on the bottom of the first slide if you want to follow along. So this is who's presenting today. The first one is me. My name is Brianna Hughes. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the reference and instruction librarians here at UBC. I'm also the graduate student services librarian, and that's my email address on the bottom.
Oh, thank you. So hi, I'm Herschel. So currently I'm served as a writing advisor with Office of Graduate Student Life. Is also a part of GSA, and my office is at 308. And I have my appointment is on the website, I think. So these are my services I provide. So I provide help with academics, any paper, research proposals, journal articles. I also help with the thesis, dissertations, helping with the chapters and formatting and with the health of. Other than that, I also help professional material like CVs, cover letters, resumes, and anything related to writing. You can just come and work it. And our office is like support to graduate students, so you can have coffee. Like this morning, we had a breakfast, so you can also come and visit. And you can randomly walk if you have nothing. Like I have walk-in Wednesdays from 10 to 12, and yeah.
All right, so those of you who are here joining us today, do you mind introducing yourselves, letting us know who you are, what year you are, and kind of what brought you here today? Is there something specific you had a question about or something that you wanted to work on?
My name is Cindy. I'm the PhD program for the mechanical engineering. I'm second year, and well, I participated the other day. You said that was here, so I'm here. So.
Well, welcome.
I didn't introduce so basically I'm a PhD student, almost completed my one year, and my major is information systems, the domain in health informatics. Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, so with the few of us that are here, I thought maybe we could start with kind of learning a little bit about what writing projects do you all struggle with. So maybe what's something that you often need support with, if there's a specific type of writing or a piece of writing, what's something that you find extremely challenging when it comes to writing. If you don't mind sharing, that would be great, kind of giving us an idea of what we should cover today.
What do you mean by writing projects? Like what types?
Anything, a paper, emails, cover letters.
Okay, cover letters, one. That's why I went to the other workshop, the literature review.
Yeah.
The problem.
Online, they said lit reviews as well.
So I don't know, I guess the thesis also, right? I'm gonna write someday. That's not like easy. So whatever can teach me is fine.
You're open to anything. All right, great. Do you mind online? What program are you in? You can just put it in the chat, just so I kind of can know what cybersecurity. Okay, great. So we have science lit reviews. I don't think, did you come to the lit review workshop? Laura did. Laura was at the lit review workshop yesterday. But yeah, we have a lot of lit review resources. So if that's something you want additional support with after our workshop today, I can certainly give you ideas of where to go to get that information. So lit reviews, cover letters, dissertations and theses.
So to add to that, like cover letters, so there's one more coming in next month by Career Center, and I will be also there. So
I also struggle, like, for example, depending on the job, they like statement of research or those kind of things, like say your skills, your experience, like, and they can keep repeating the stuff in different questions. And I don't know, like, if I should just list it or actually do like a small short essay. So
yeah, so like personal statements, statements of research or philosophies of research, those are often kind of, there, it's a vague name, so it's kind of
Yes,
confusing
and
maybe what you should include.
each website, for example, if you go to other universities, right, the big ones, like they have like Cornell has, Harvard, MIT, whatever shows up there, they approach it differently, and then I get lost. So that's one.
Personally, I have been to like almost 80 interviews. So that experience I can share with you. So you can book every week you can come and book an appointment with me. So resume, cover letter. That is the thing I have personally experienced, so I can help you.
Okay.
And you said you're doing a cover letter
Yeah,
workshop.
next month with the Career Center, I think on 27th.
Where can folks go to find your workshops?
So I think on email, if you follow the library or Career Center, they have,
I
if you
do.
go to the events,
But lately, just like
so you can just book an appointment.
Okay.
So like if you scan the code, you can book an appointment with me
okay.
next week.
And then it's gonna have the
So you can book like you can be virtual or in person. So it's in Commons 308. So
okay.
once
Mhm. Just
once
the
you book an appointment, you can walk in. And if you don't want book an appointment on Wednesdays, so I have like walk-ins
9 to 2.
10 to 12. You can just walk. So if it's like resume, cover letter, or something which is just can be done in 5 to 10 minutes, you can just walk.
Okay.
in. And we have coffee as well. So
Okay, thank you.
coffee and treat if you want.
Good. Thank you.
Great. So this is the agenda for today. Not a lot. Doesn't look like a lot, but there's a lot of information we're going to cover. So we're going to talk about academic writing. We're going to talk about technical writing, professional writing, and then I'll leave you with some resources, both from the library, but also other places on campus. And so for each of these different types of writing, we'll talk about what it is, what are some examples that you might run into, what are some characteristics for each one, what are some common issues that students have with each type of writing, and then what are some examples or ways to fix those issues. Great. So for academic writing, we kind of just, it's the kind of writing most of us associate with grad school. It's formal, it's structured, it's grounded in evidence. And this is the kind of writing you do for things like seminar papers, your theses, dissertations, and often for like journal submissions if you submit to a journal ever. It follows conventions that are kind of shaped by the specific disciplines, and it often is kind of like participating in an ongoing scholarly conversation is one way we describe it. The purpose of academic writing is often just, it's not just reporting information, but demonstrating you have an understanding of a topic, that you can analyze ideas critically and contribute something meaningful to your discipline or your field. You're positioning your work oftentimes within the landscape of research in that area, and showing how your argument fits into the larger conversation. And then some different types, some examples. Sometimes it can be like persuasive writing. You might see something that's more analytical or critical, expository, where you're sharing information. Your goal is to explain a concept clearly. In all of these cases, you know, the common thread, however, is evidence-based reasoning in a scholarly framework. Okay. Here's some 5 characteristics of academic writing. So a lot of times when you are looking at a piece of academic writing, these are some things that most of them will have in common. There's usually some kind of structure or method that is followed. Pattern, roadmap is another way to think about it. Evidence-based, strongly rooted in evidence, and that could be data that's been collected, research that's been done, experiments that have been run, articles, books, some kind of evidence is the root of all academic writing. The language is usually fairly formal. Some of that varies from discipline to discipline, but universally it's usually fairly formal. Not to say that it's complicated or wordy, but still you want to use formal language. It's generally objective. So even when you're making an argument, the tone focuses on ideas and empirical evidence rather than emotion or feeling. And finally, it should be clear and precise. So strong academic writing avoids ambiguity. You define key terms, communicate complex ideas as directly as you can. So these are 4 categories of common issues that students can face when they're working on academic writing, and some of these may hit a little too close to home for some of you. So for language, you know, we think of it, language is how clearly and accurately your ideas are expressed at like the sentence level. Oftentimes, students run into issues of being too informal or too wordy, too verbose, a lack of clarity. Evidence, we think about, again, the evidence that you're using, that you're grounding your assumptions or assertions in. And sometimes students don't include enough citations or enough evidence, or sometimes they include too many citations. Sometimes the evidence that you supply is not relevant to the research question. You want to make sure that your evidence is keenly tied in. Maybe fake citations. A lot of students are falling into the pitfall of using AI to find citations, and that can sometimes lead to fake ones. I think one of the biggest issues with evidence is a lack of analysis. So just presenting the evidence without offering any kind of criticism, analytical lens, or anything like that. And using too many quotes, where a paper becomes nothing but a wall of quotes and not enough paraphrasing, summarization, or again, critical analysis. Structure, papers need to flow. They need to have an organization. A lot of times there may be specific roadmaps or formats that one should be following. Maybe your thesis or your research question isn't well developed, or the conclusion doesn't link back to that. And then finally, a lot of students run into the issue of what is the purpose? Again, having a clear thesis that clearly states from the beginning of the paper, what is my thesis? And then not often linking back to the thesis or your research question throughout the piece of writing, and not matching reader expectations. So whether it's you've missed the mark on what the assignment is asked for, or the thesis doesn't match the rest of the piece of writing. So let's take each of these quickly and talk about some of the ways, some examples of how you might see this, but then also what are some ways to fix those issues. So for the first one, we see, multi-word phrases. There's this kind of urge to be overly complicated and wordy. So saying things like things or a lot, various factors. Maybe you are too informal, like you use a bunch of, or huge results, or maybe overly conversational. So I think that excessive hedging or overconfidence, so too strongly asserting something. So for the example of multi-word phrases, conducted an analysis of could be much more simplified by just saying analyzed. Instead of saying due to the fact that, cut that down to just one word and say because. I think, again, we think we need to be more wordy because it's more impressive and it sounds like we know what we're talking about more. The first time I presented this workshop, I blew a lot of students' minds when I told them that sentences should be no longer than 25 words. And they kind of were shocked by that number. So if your sentence is longer than 20 to 30 words, look for ways to divide that sentence into multiple sentences. Something longer than 30 words can be confusing. It could lack clarity. It can be a lot for the reader to try to process all at once. Thinking about vague nouns. So instead of saying this suggests, well, one, what is this alluding to? But also, what is it suggesting? So instead try this increase in temperature suggests, okay? Again, thinking about clarity, thinking about being more specific. And so when you're editing, a good tip might be to go through your paper and circle every time you see this, that, or it, and then looking for the noun that those words refer to. Does it appear in the sentence? And then making sure you're using an academic tone. I gave the example of a bunch of. Instead of that, say several. Instead of saying huge, say substantial. Instead of I think that, try this analysis suggests or the evidence suggests. And try to avoid being overly exaggerative. So instead of saying proves, because again, evidence, there's always room for error, try demonstrates or suggests. When we're talking about evidence, again, that's sometimes academic articles or other pieces of research writing, data, statistics, research methods that you have. Think about your sources need to be solidly integrated into the paper. Don't just mention them once and kind of vaguely allude back to them throughout the rest of the article. So thinking about making sure you have the correct in-text citations, or maybe there's a mismatch between citations and your reference list. inconsistent citing style, or citing facts that don't require citation, or failing to cite things that should be cited. Sometimes you can see this evidence issue with wording that's been slightly rearranged from the source. So in an effort to not be directly quoting, students will change the order of words, but not change it enough to be a paraphrase. Overly paraphrasing can also be an issue, though, without quotation marks. So it is a delicate balance between summarizing, paraphrasing, and quoting. So here's one way to fix a situation where your sources haven't been integrated well. So create a context for them. Think about this source, who and what is it, and why am I including this? And then detail that, write that down so that the reader knows you've come across a source. Why is this source being included here? And then this is a good kind of flow. Introduce the source, cite it, explain the source, and then connect it back to your original research. Okay. Thinking about types of sources and how you use them. It needs to match the scope of the research that you're doing. So incorporating multiple perspectives when appropriate, using only the most recent and relevant scholarship. Ensure that any claims you offer are proportionate to the strength of the evidence. So if you are claiming something and being very strong in that claim, or it's the majority of your argument, you need enough citations or evidence to back up that claim. And then one thing you can do is, as you're writing, check in what kind of evidence would convince someone who is skeptical when reading this article, or maybe someone who was new to the topic. Have you given enough evidence to kind of explain the research? Citation issues can be a real struggling point for some students. I've got a lot of suggestions here. The first one would be to, as a graduate student, you really should be using a citation manager tool. Zotero and EndNote are the two that we kind of work with here at the library. PaperPile is another one that I'm hearing a lot about. More and more students seem to be familiar with PaperPile. So all three are great options. We do offer workshops and reference help, research help with Zotero and EndNote. Really, this is kind of a practical suggestion. Is as soon as you think you might use or read a source, make sure you're adding the citation to your citation manager, because if you have read a source, there's always the chance that it might sneak into your final research project, even if you don't intend it to necessarily. So as soon as you think this might end up being even the slightest bit useful, make sure you capture the citation. Think about who is the intellectual owner of something. So making sure that you're citing things like ideas, data, theories, or any kind of interpretation of facts that aren't yours. A general rule of thumb, I think this is a question that I get both from undergraduate students, but also graduate students, is when do I know something is, I should cite it? When do I know if something is worth citing or not? The rule of thumb is if something is a fact that the average person on the street wouldn't know, so it's not quote unquote common knowledge, it needs a citation, okay? Cite early, so the very first time you mention a fact or use data or have an idea that you're using from someone else, it needs a citation, and you need to cite often as well. And then make sure that you are citing things that are quotes, any kind of data that you did not collect yourself, summaries, paraphrasing, all of these things need citations. Paraphrasing is something a lot of students struggle with. So how is it different from a summarization? A summarization is really just restating what the original author or the original evidence said. Paraphrasing is you're summarizing the idea, not the words. Okay, sometimes that can be helpful to think about it that way. So compare your version, your paraphrasing, to the original version to make sure it's different enough that you don't need to be quoting it. And when in doubt, you can never, well, you can, but when in doubt, cite clearly, just to avoid any kind of issues.
So like to add something beside this, so timing is very important to start early as possible, because the thing I'm hearing from other students, like they leave it like for the end, and the literature review which was discussed, it takes the most amount of time. So usually people start, they already have the data. So you can start from your data, then you can go up. So literature review can come afterwards. But if you are starting paper from scratch and you have a hypothesis, you need a literature review. So you can, if you have the already data set, you can start from data set, then you can go up. So abstract and introduction, you can put it afterwards. And to also to include like cite. if you have any numbers you are going to talk about, please cite that. Because if there is a number, like you said, there's a 24% increase in fluoride in water, you have to show from where you are getting the data because it requires a data set. And if it's in your own research, then you can say, from my own research, by this method, I found out there was like 20% increase. So that needs citation. And also remember, there's like a thing called self-citation. So if you are using something from your previous paper, you have to cite this as well. And you need permission to add that. So talk to your advisor. If you're in a class, talk to your advisor. There's also something called ethical AI. So once you are using AI, so I am from a technical background. So from some classes, some professor agreed to, if you're using AI to learn something, but you can use it for coding, but don't use that as an assignment, because sometimes they are using some AI tools. We can pick that, what AI tools you have used. Another thing, like right now, there's a thing like am dashes. So if you are habit of writing dashes in between big long ham dashes, which we call that, avoid that. You can have put comma, because right now AI is picking that not as an AI thing. So avoid using that. You can have like semicolon or something like that. Avoid using am dashes. And
Yeah, that's a dead giveaway for AI generated.
Yeah, so
content.
so right now the provost, he has some guidelines of using AI. He also mentioned like AI is not perfect, so it can say something which is wrong. So please verify it, because right now I can give you example. Last week I was applying for a scholarship, so I put my paper. So it's a writing sample. You have to provide some data from your paper. So in paper, in the starting, I mentioned I have a BDS degree from India. But when I see the paper, he mentioned Nigeria on that. So if I have not read the paper, in the first, I am degree from Nigeria, where I never been from. So it's important to check. And right now, if you're publishing paper, I think there is something going on. I think in IEEE or something, big paper, the one student used some fake citations, which was marked afterwards when the editorial board put that in the AI, and AI picked that this is an AI. It doesn't exist. So please review it. If you are putting some citation, please review it. Because if they found out there's like whole committee, they are going to talk to you. And it can also lead to expulsion. So
Yeah.
be aware of that. So I have like a class in 5 minutes, so I have to leave early. But remember, you can start with me. I can help with anything. I can provide the student perspective. So thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
No problem.
Thank you.
All right, talking about structural issues that students can sometimes run into. So, make sure that you are clearly stating your thesis to avoid any kind of confusion, and don't deviate away from that thesis. So one way to fix that, or one example of that, would be the introduction provides background, but then never states the main claim or research question clearly. Or maybe like your paper, the point of it shifts halfway through. So write one sentence that clearly captures your purpose. And it may seem kind of silly to start the sentence by saying this paper argues or this study examines, but that can be a great signpost for your reader as to, hey, this is what I should be looking out for throughout the paper. And then regularly check back in as you're writing. Every section or paragraph should relate back to your thesis in some way. Paragraphs should follow a consistent pattern of what is the point? What evidence are you offering to support that point? What's the explanation of that evidence? And then what's the connection of your evidence back to the point of your paragraph? So begin with a topic sentence that makes a claim. What is this paragraph going to be about? And try to aim for just one idea per paragraph. Similar to that 25 to 30 word rule in a sentence, paragraphs should be really containing one idea. And if it's more than that, you need to consider perhaps breaking it into multiple paragraphs. Papers really are expected to follow some specific formats. I'm one of the science librarians, so for me, IMRAD is kind of the roadmap that I teach a lot of my students. So that stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. That's the progression a paper in a lot of STEM and even some social science fields should follow. For other social sciences, we might see a format of literature leads to where is the gap in literature, and then study. And then for humanities, you might start out with an argument, create context for that argument, analysis of the research that you've done, and then what are the implications of that research, okay? each section should has a job. So think of the methods section as talking about what you did. The results talks about what you found, and the discussion talk about what it means. And really clearly stick to that kind of division of jobs between the different sections. Readers should be able to understand kind of where you're going throughout the paper, but also throughout paragraphs and sections. And they need to kind of be able to understand, all right, this paragraph has ended, we're starting a new one, and this is how the two relate to each other. Sometimes you can make that clear at the very beginning in the introduction of your paper by saying, this paper proceeds in 3 parts, and then listing the parts, talking about what the reader might find in each part. Use words that are like transitions to build bridges between paragraphs. So things like however, or in contrast, that lets your reader know that the paragraph coming up kind of is the reverse of what, or goes against the previous paragraph. And then use other linking phrases like this matters because. Again, it's all about trying to create connections for your reader so that they don't have to do that themselves. Thinking about the purpose of your writing. So for your reader, they need to know early on, what is the central argument? It needs to be clear and strong. We kind of touched on this in the structural section, but thinking about having your thesis early and stated clearly. Again, right off the bat, what is this paper saying? This paper argues that. Make sure that each section connects explicitly back to your central argument. When you are talking about the product of your work should match the assignment. So what's the goal of the assignment? Sometimes that's pretty explicit from your professor, but are you trying to analyze something? Are you reflecting on something? Are you arguing a point, or are you offering a report on some information or data? So as you're writing, check in with yourself. Am I meeting the goal of this assignment or this writing exercise? Always keep in mind your audience. So who is going to be reading this paper? That will play a large role in the vocabulary that you use, the ideas that you share. Those should both match your reader's level of understanding or their experience with their topic, okay? And you need to adjust your level of detail based on your reader's expertise. What's the intent? Again, going back to the last slide, are you educating? Are you trying to convince someone of something? Are you persuading them about something? It should be pretty obvious to your reader what the significance of your work is, because you should be stating that early on. Explicitly state why this research or issue matters, both maybe within the discipline that you're writing in or the research area. In the conclusion, articulate what kind of implications your research has on other areas of research. Think about what limitations you ran across and maybe suggest future research directions. Using phrases like this matters because, or these findings suggest, also can notify your reader, hey, I need to pay attention to what's about to be said. All right, that's a lot. Let's pause for a second. Who has questions about academic writing or anything we've covered so far?
Well, you mentioned like the language issues. My problem is, for example, when I have a figure,
Mhm.
and then it also is like figure this, shows this, describe this, presents this. And then I don't have any more synonyms for this anymore. And I'm like, this looks so horrible, but I don't like see an end to it. So
Yeah, I think it feels awkward. It feels strange to be using the same words over and over again. But that's the nature of language, is that there's only so many ways to say something. You certainly could look up a thesaurus, but again, stick to simple, common words. Don't start trying to use overly formal language or strange words just to avoid kind of duplicating things. It's okay to kind of have some repetition, because there's only so many ways to say the same thing, right? Read it out loud can sometimes be helpful as well, or step away from the writing and come back to it later with kind of fresh eyes. And again, read it again and think, does this really sound awkward, or did it sound awkward because I was like in the middle of writing it at the time?
thank you.
Good question though. Any questions online? Great. Let's talk about technical writing now. So what is technical writing? It's writing that communicates specialized or complex information in a clear, precise, and structured way for a very specific audience. In grad school, sometimes that might mean it's closely tied to research methods or evidence. The key difference from more kind of general academic writing, like we just talked about, is that technical writing is usually designed to help someone use the information you're sharing with them, not just think about it. So replicability is a big element of technical writing. So the purpose of technical writing is very practical. It helps readers understand what you did in the lab or out in the field, evaluate whether your approach to the research, excuse me, makes sense, and then act on your findings. That might mean assessing your methods or making a decision based on your data. And because of that, technical writing puts a lot of emphasis on things like clarity, accuracy, and transparency. Here's some examples of technical writing, things like scientific reports and journal articles, research proposals, conference abstracts, grant applications, briefs, technical memos. So the format may change in all those examples, but the goal or the essence of the technical writing stays the same. Make the information easy to follow, evaluate, and then use. So what are some characteristics of technical writing? It's always very process or data driven, less emphasis on the evidence, like with academic writing. It's more about the hard data and the process of gathering that data. Technical writing should always be efficient. So a lot of times the reader is trying to get through the information as quick as possible so that they can move on to what they're going to be doing with it. In many cases, there is a very standard way of putting together technical writing, some things that you'll notice over and over again if you read a lot of technical writing, and it should also be very objective. You're not offering your opinion, and a lot of times you're not offering your own analysis or criticism of something. You are just stating facts, okay? This is something that is far more common in STEM fields than in humanities and social sciences. There are times you may come across it as a humanities or social science student, but technical writing is really most often found in STEM fields. So what are some common issues that students face with technical writing? First, much like the academic writing, it's language. So being too dense or using too much jargon that's specific to that discipline or field, maybe over or even understating any kind of claims that you're making, and then being too vague with your quantitative language. There can be issues with documentation and transparency. So being incomplete or unclear about your methods, leaving out units anytime you are sharing data, missing parameters, or not including the limitations that you came across in your research. For issues of structure, we often see, poor organization, an unclear purpose or conclusion, and then kind of results and interpretation being all mixed together when really those should be kind of separate parts of the piece of technical writing. And then again, similar to academic writing, you need to consider your audience. And sometimes students run into issues of kind of the vocabulary doesn't match who the audience is, not defining acronyms or key terms, or sometimes kind of the reverse of providing unnecessary background information when you know your audience is going to be someone who's very familiar with the topic that you're presenting. So let's talk about some ways that you can fix these issues. For the first, with vocabulary, some of the ways that you'll see this is students, writers will use acronyms without ever defining them. They will have long sentences that are really packed with technical terms. You may kind of see some assumptions where the reader might already understand some specialized vocabulary, which isn't always the case. And then kind of like this excessive hedging. An example with that would be like, may possibly suggest. Possibly and may are both hedging words, and we want to try to avoid doing that too much because it takes away any kind of authority or strength your argument has. So some examples of ways to fix this is making sure you define any key terms or acronyms, making sure that you're breaking longer sentences into multiple shorter ones, For the research claims, make sure that you avoid making any kind of generalization and that your verbs match the strength of your evidence. So using things like suggest, indicates, and demonstrates, those all have slightly different meanings. And I already mentioned the hedging. When you are looking at the issue of like vague quantitative language, making sure that you're providing data instead of using statements like a slight increase or several participants. What number, how much of that increase? The temperature went up 12 degrees Celsius. Or how many is several participants? It was 3. Making sure you're always including units of whatever it is that you are talking about. For overly complex sentence structure, again, make sure you're trying to keep sentences down to just one idea. For issues of documentation and transparency, sometimes we can run into issues of unclear methods. So make sure that you're including enough detail that someone in your field could reproduce the research that you've done that you're sharing with them. Make sure you specify things like what tools did you use? Were there any models that you used? Settings, language or vocabulary. For missing units and parameters, make sure you always, again, use your units. Make sure you're always mentioning any kind of conditions that the experiment was done in. So again, the goal of this is to be able to reproduce your work. They need to know exactly what it was like when you were doing it. If you don't report your limitations, there may be a desire to avoid mentioning limitations as it might make you seem like you messed up or didn't know what you were doing. You really need to make sure that you disclose any limitations you came across or things that you weren't able to do. Thinking about citations, making sure you're always citing any methods that you used, any data that you are including that's not your own, and then a full data set. Structural issues, again, similar to academic writing, making sure that you're following a clear progression. IMRAD is another, I'm going to mention that again. It's something that you see in a lot of STEM papers, making sure that each section is focused on its job and sticking to that job. And then making sure, again, state your purpose in the introduction clearly. Include maybe a roadmap at the very beginning so the author or the reader knows what to expect as they read through your paper. And then make sure your introduction ends with a very clear statement of purpose. I mentioned your results and interpretation can kind of mix together. Make sure that you're reporting your data, your results, separate from interpreting when possible. So first outline all of the data and then interpret that data. You can use sentences to kind of summarize major trends in your data and again, kind of wrapping up everything neatly for your reader to understand what's going on. Making sure that you start all your paragraphs with topic sentences. Making sure, again, using transition words to make bridges between different paragraphs. And if you are moving from one section to another, consider including a brief one-sentence summary so that the reader kind of knows what they just read. Be reminded of what they just read. For audience issues, think about, again, similar to what is the goal of your writing, who is going to be reading your writing? That will make a big difference. If you are submitting this technical report to a grant council who don't have any experience in the research that you conducted, that's really going to have a different tone and different vocabulary than submitting a paper to someone else who works in your research lab. So who is your reader, and how do you need to alter your language, your tone to match that? Similarly, if it's someone who has experience in your research field, don't weigh your paper down with too much background information. Only give them information that they might not already know and what they need to know in order to understand your work. Questions about technical writing? Kind of zoom through that because we're only got 20 minutes left. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you say like report data first and interpret it later? But then I have the limit of like more or less 25 words.
Right. So the reason I say that, reporting first, interpreting later, is so that someone can get a clear picture of all of your data before you get into the interpretation, because that might make it a little bit more easier for them to understand What's your analysis? What are you interpreting if they have a clear picture of the data? Now you can go back and refer to the data in your interpretation, but really present all your data up front and first before you get to the interpretation part. Yeah. Any questions online? Okay. Let's talk about professional writing. This is where your cover letters, CVs, statements of purpose, personal statements, all that sort of stuff comes in. So what is professional writing? Skip ahead to my notes here. So the purpose a lot of times of professional writing is career related. So whether it's to advance your career or to network, to anywhere your audience maybe is a decision maker or you're asking them to do something on your behalf, and they're not necessarily, it's not within a scholarly context. So some examples are things like emails, personal statements, CVs or resumes, requests for letters of recommendation, LinkedIn profiles, and then a lot more. Here's some characteristics of professional writing. It's strategic. So you have a goal in mind, and you need to strategically ask for someone to do you a favor or do something for you. It should be concise, again, because you want to show that you value the person that you're writing to, value their time. But you also want to come out of it with a result, with something to be done. Being aware of your tone, of your audience, and having that really impact the way you write is important as well. So some of the common issues that students face when working on professional writing projects are things like having an unclear purpose, or your tone doesn't match your audience. You know, you're not vague or kind of unquantified achievements, overly academic language, maybe weak formatting or structure, something that's too generic or it's not tailored to the audience that you're sending it to. So let's dial in on purpose issues of purpose. With an unclear ask, your reader, the person you're asking a favor from or you're asking them to do something, needs to know, again, what is the purpose of this letter early on? So start out by saying, I am requesting, or I'm writing to apply for, or I'm writing to ask for your help with this, or I would appreciate the opportunity to. Make sure that you're kind of concluding, but also early on, perhaps name what it is you want to get out of this piece of writing. So a 20-minute reading, or I'm writing to request a letter of recommendation. I am writing to, I would appreciate any kind of feedback on my draft. If it's an email that you're sending with this request, make sure you put in your ask in the subject line, if at all possible. Again, that way the person knows before they even open up the email, what am I about to be asked for? What am I about to read? Ending your request without any kind of action step can oftentimes leave your reader confused and frustrated. You know, what am I supposed to do with this information? So make sure you end with a very specific next step. So for example, could you confirm by Friday, or are you available Tuesday or 2 or Thursday at 10? Those are questions that the reader needs to get back to you with. And it leaves them with a clear sense of, what am I supposed to do with this information? If there's a timeline in play here, you know, there's deadlines or something, make sure you include that information, and then make it easy for them to respond with kind of a yes or no, or a very quick response. Sometimes it's best to send an email or write a letter that has just a few asks instead of a bunch of things that you need from them, or a bunch of follow-up questions. Instead, send your first message to have maybe 1 or 2 questions, and then follow up with additional questions in future messages. Making sure that you are being descriptive, but not overly persuasive. And what I mean by that is, you know, adding because sentences so that it kind of, you are linking back your experience to what value you bring to whatever it is you're applying for. So instead of just listing out your responsibilities, what are the outcomes of those experiences, and what strengths did you offer? So an example would be, I am prepared to do X because I've done Y. Again, linking it back to yourself. One clear fit sentence per paragraph is kind of ideal for cover statements or cover letters or statements. Make sure that you're naming the opportunity specifically. Are you applying for a lab position? Are you applying for a grant? Are you looking for help getting into a program? And making sure that you are picking up language if there's a prompt or an ask that you're kind of drawing from, making sure you're including some of that language in your ask. Including one concrete detail is good to make sure that you show the person you've done some homework, you've done some background reading. It's oftentimes will be helpful for the person. Making sure that your language is not too informal or too casual. Start with a professional greeting. Hello, dear, that sort of thing. Keep your sentences direct and focused. Again, don't let them get on too long or kind of meandering. Leave out filler phrases, things like or just, super. And think one check-in you could do is, would I say this in a meeting with my boss? Okay. On the other hand, you don't want to be too stiff or overly formal. So use plain language, try not to be overly formal. You're professional, but not theoretical. Try to avoid any use of jargon heavy language. Just, make sure you're defining terms. Again, leaving out any kind of excessive hedging or apologizing. I think a lot of students nowadays, the inclination is to apologize for bothering someone. And instead of doing that, maybe offer an appreciation. Thank you for your time instead of I'm sorry for bothering you. Leave out any kind of unnecessary qualifiers like kind of or maybe. And then make sure you're being confident with your request. Could you please? Make sure that you're talking about your responsibilities. So what did you do and how was something changed because of what you did? Action plus result. Making sure that you're being clear about your strengths. This is not a time to kind of be humble sometimes. What evidence also do you have to support your strength? So I managed a team of 5 and coordinated 12 workshops. How does that impact your ask? No quantification. Again, similar to technical writing, make sure you're always including hard facts or numbers. So instead of just saying, I organized some events. How many events? I organized 8 events. Even when you have to guess at numbers, approximate numbers by saying approximately or about is better than offering no numbers at all. And make sure you are supporting any kind of claims you are making about your skills or your impact. So make sure you are, offering some examples. Even better if it comes with your CV and your CV has some of that hard data that can back up any kind of claims that you make. Thinking about your audience in professional writing. So instead of kind of sending out generic or the same language or the same form documents, make sure that the reader knows this was written specifically for them. So you can do that by naming the specific role or institution that you're writing to. Reference something kind of distinctive or something that you've read, like the mission or the initiative. Make sure that you're revising 20 to 30%. That's kind of just a rough guideline of every time you send out a copy of the same document. So let's say I'm sending out 3 letters, requests for letters of recommendation. Each one should be slightly different from the other. You never know when people are going to talk about requests that they've gotten, and it may come back to, oh, this person sent the same letter to the same person. And also, I know this has happened to me where I've sent something to multiple people and I copy and paste into different emails and I don't change the name. And that's always very embarrassing. Similarly, make sure that you are tailoring what you're writing to the reader, linking it back to who they are, what role they have. So this experience aligns with your emphasis on what. But also don't try to be overly flattering. So remove any kind of like impressive, you're trying to impress them, be factual, be clear. You want to be concise with professional writing, so leaving out anything that's extra, so doesn't support your purpose or isn't really relevant to your ask. The tone needs to match kind of the formality of the situation. So if you're writing to the chair of your department, might be a little different from writing to your advisor because you have a different kind of relationship with those two people. Questions about professional writing? All right, in our last few minutes here, that's the end of the content. I do have some resources that I want to share with folks after this, but before we move on to that, if you all don't mind completing our feedback request, it's not very long, it's just a couple questions. We're always trying to grow our workshops, and I've offered this particular workshop a few different times now, and each time it's been a little different. In the past, when I've done this, it's just been about technical writing, but I've heard from students that they wanted more content about professional academic writing. So if this was helpful for you, please let me know. If you would have liked to have been more about academic writing, let me know so I can kind of get feedback and change it for the future if I need to. Okay, so some resources. Harshal was here and he talked about his appointments. You know, he does walk-ins on Wednesdays. You can make appointments following the QR code at the beginning of the slides or this link here. His office is in the comments. There's also the Graduate Student Postdoctoral Development Program. They offer a lot of workshops that can be really helpful for grad students, and it's about all sorts of professional development, scholarly development sort of things. I actually co-facilitated one this past Monday. It was part of the Decoding or Uncoding grad school series, and we talked about kind of organizing and staying on top of your research efforts. So if that sounds like something that is interesting, they have a whole host of workshops, certifications that they offer. There's a website on the grad school's website about dissertation services. It has a lot of different resources, including it talks about Dissertation House, which is a program that you can apply to that can be kind of like a year-long thing where it has intensive help for students writing dissertations. And the Career Center offers a lot of workshops and great resources, mostly doing with professional writing. So if that's something that you feel like is a challenge for you, definitely check out their website. Remember, Harshal mentioned that he's doing a cover letter workshop with the Career Center. I think he said it was next week. And then here's some resources from the library. The first is our Graduate Student Resource Guide. It's got a lot of information, some about writing, but also about other things just related to research and the graduate student experience on campus. We have a lot of workshops. I know you all have been to a few of them already. I recognize all of your names. So you may not need that information, but we have a lot of workshops and tutorials, all helpful for graduate students. We didn't really talk about citations specifically, and we definitely mentioned them early on in the presentation, but the link there will take you to our page on the library's website that has a lot of helpful information about citations, also Zotero and EndNote. And then if you want the slides for today's workshop, I'll be sending an email out in the next couple of days with this recording and the slides, but you can also grab them at this tiny URL here. So that's it. Thank you all for coming. We got a couple more minutes, so if there's any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. All right, well, if there's no questions, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for coming.